Okay guys, so in this video, we are talking about probably the most popular topic as far as Japanese history is concerned, and that is the samurai. So in the previous video, we talked about the Heian period and the development of Heian-kyo, so the capital city, which eventually becomes Kyoto, the development of aristocratic court culture, etc. It's very insular, it's very really does not leave the city too much. But the imperial court holds sway to varying degrees over most of the islands of Japan. So definitely Kyushu, definitely Shikoku, so the two closest ones to China pretty much, and most of Honshu, so the big guy. Hokkaido, not really in this period, that's much more of a 19th century thing. But in order to actually gain control and keep control of the islands, you need some kind of a land tenure system, you need some kind of a military, and you need some kind of stewardship or governor class, basically, that works with the imperial court and the aristocrats to maintain order out in the countryside. So what happens, pretty much an oversimplification of this, is that the aristocrats and the imperial family do not leave the imperial city. They don't leave Heian-kyo. What they do is the imperial family basically backs up and legitimates the right of aristocrats to chunks of land all across the Japanese Isles. But because the aristocrats aren't out there actively governing, they are having local governors, local people in charge to govern the land, to collect the taxes, to protect it from any kind of attack, to protect it from banditry, oversee the peasantry. If there's a problem, these people are the ones that deal with it. So what happens around the year 1000, 900, 1000, 1050, like that range, there appears to be something of a population decline. There appears to have been some kind of military trouble. It is not necessarily all across the Japanese Empire, but it's definitely in enough places that the sources make note of it, and stuff like this happens enough that what appears to have occurred, basically as far as we can tell, what happens is all of these problems result in the concentration of shogun, so basically the land of the states, in greater and greater numbers under fewer and fewer people. So the court aristocrats do not leave the city, but because all these people are reproducing, they're getting more and more and more children, especially the imperial family. What they do is they say, okay, we've got a family and there are X amount of kids. 20 kids, 30 kids, 40 kids, whatever. We have enough space in the imperial capital for these guys. There are problems out in the countryside, so we're going to take a few of these people, we're going to invest them with the authority to raise armies, to raise taxes, to basically become what look like warlords, and send them out into the countryside to assist the local governors who are helping manage the aristocratic estates, the shogun, and these new members of the aristocratic families who are now slowly transitioning into the role of, warriors or soldiers. These guys are going to go maintain the peace out in the countryside. So, over time, what happens is, well, you have aristocrats going out there who are kind of militarized, and you have some governors who are taking it upon themselves to become militarized or semi-militarized to basically help protect the land, as they are instructed to do so by the aristocrats who live in the capital. Well, here's the problem. Japan based its military off of China, so there is a conscript system in the 700s, in the 800s, a little bit into the 900s. This doesn't appear to have worked all that well in the long run. Why? Well, if you're a peasant and you are conscripted into service, you are, well, you may be given a weapon, like a spear, or a bow, or something, but really, you're expected to provide your own stuff. So you're expected to provide your own armor, your weapons, your food, etc. There's not really a centralized armory or a centralized body that kind of distributes the weapons. So how do you get this stuff? Well, you have to pay for it somehow, which means you need to take wealth from your family. You need to give it to somebody if you don't know how to forge the stuff yourself and have it made for you. When you go on campaign, your family loses you, so they lose a hand on the farm. So now the family is working harder. They're giving a chunk of the resources they produce to you. So long term, this basically just is not tenable. And it's not tenable because they're taking a Chinese system, which is designed for China, and placing it onto a Japanese way of doing things. So it just, over time, it just doesn't really work out all that well. So now we have this issue. These people are being sent out as members of the imperial family, as members of the aristocracy, cadet branches, basically, out into the frontier zones. And yeah, okay, maybe they have, like, a small unit of, like, household guards or something. But if you're fighting a war, especially a long, protracted war, bringing 10, 15, 20 people with you is not going to do anything. And now that an imperial military is slowly being phased out between 800 and about 1000, what do you do? So the historiography here used to be pretty divided. It used to be assumed that the rise of the samurai, the rise of what basically ends up becoming private military power in Japan, is done because the court aristocracy had no interest in running the country. They were much more interested in cultural pursuits, so they just kind of focused on the city, and they let everything else go to hell out in the countryside. It's been challenged a lot recently, and the new consensus is that the rise of the samurai, the rise of, well, the people that become samurai, anyway, the rise of private military power on the frontiers under the governance of cadet branches of the imperial family and cadet branches of the aristocracy that are being sent out to these regions was part of a deliberate experimentation. And Carl Friday's books really go into this if you want a deep dive. It's part of a deliberate experimentation on the part of the imperial court in order to find a system that works. So I'm going to go more into detail with this in the series I have on the Age of the Samurai, because we're going to be doing a couple of deep dives into how these people develop. But basically, as far as we can tell, what happens is that, so these cadet branches are being sent out. Maybe they have some household guards, maybe they have a unit or two of what's left of the imperial military as it's being restructured. But they're going into areas where there are hit-and-run raids by guerrilla fighters, so people in the north that are not part of the Japanese state, so the Emishi. They are going into the south and southwest to fight pirates, so people that know the tides, people that know the currents, and where you can disembark, where you can embark and do it safely, where you should go in the day with a ship, where you don't go at night, in order to not be smashed upon rocks. So the people that are being sent up by the court were former aristocrats. They don't know this stuff. And the military they're taking with them, to the extent it doesn't exist, they don't know it either. So what do? And the answer is, well, you have to work with the people that know the environment in which you are trying to fight. So the two main cadet branches of the imperial family we're going to be focusing on in this video, the Minamoto and the Taira. The Minamoto are known as very vicious, very tenacious fighters. They're very skilled in the ways of war. And they are also known for things like going on these great hunts. They are known for things like archery contests. They're known for things like tracking contests, like who can find the biggest animal in the woods the fastest, kill it, bring it back. Then we have the feast. When Minamoto children, when Minamoto sons become men, part of the manhood ceremony is you have to go hunt. So, how are they learning this stuff? Well, they're fighting basically in forests. That's where they're stationed to go fight. So, in order to do that, you need people that know the forest. You need people that know the road system, the game tree. So you hire hunters to bring them into your clan as retainers. And then over time, those hunters that you're hiring, whether or not they're Japanese or Emishi or somebody else, they still know the environment, they know the game trails, they know how to stalk and to kill animals silently with a bow. All of which the Minamoto end up bringing into their military. They're co-opting local people who know how to hunt, who know basically how to do guerrilla warfare without actually conducting guerrilla warfare. They're just hunting and then taking that and applying it to martial activities. The Taira, who basically operate on the other end of Japan, are initially tasked with going to quell pirates. Well, you're going to go fight people at sea. What do? Well, you can bring some pirates in to your retainer system and make them your hereditary vassals. You also bring, fishermen, people that know the coasts, stuff like that. And as it happens, this is what we see in Japanese legends, in Japanese folklore, etc., all in, this time period. The folklore reflects very strongly that outside people are being brought into these aristocratic cadet houses to basically become hired swords, paid retainers. And these are the people who gradually develop into the samurai. This is where they come from, basically. And I think it's rather striking as well that the outsider is being brought into the Japanese system. And these guys are becoming the warriors and the soldiers because in Japanese folklore and in Japanese culture more broadly, it has basically been determined by sociologists and historical anthropologists that Japanese society, for much of its history, was basically divided into two realms. You have the insider, so the village people, the townspeople, everybody knows everybody, they know how each other operate, etc. And then there's the outsider, and the outsider is the Oni, they're the demon. But in Japanese mythology and folklore, the demon has two faces. They're evil, they can come in and kill everybody and cause harm, or they can do some more benevolent stuff. There's the outsider has a good and a bad face to them, and in samurai folklore, in Japanese folklore more broadly, this is the role we see the outsider playing. This is how the Japanese view the Americans during and after the Second World War. This is how Japanese folklore views the samurai. These are people who, because they exist outside the given order of things, are able to come in and using military force in a way that the average Japanese is scared of doing because of social or religious taboo or something like that. They're able to use force to cut through all the social BS, all the religious BS, get what needs to be done, and then integrate themselves into Japanese society. So this is where the samurai come from. These are outsiders that are co-opted into Japanese society because the cadet branches being sent out by the Imperial family and the court aristocrats to go protect the land and try to go quell the north of Japan, try to quell pirates, don't know what they're doing. The military system doesn't work. So you bring violent outsiders, hunters, fishermen, pirates, bandits, etc. in. you legitimize the illegitimate use of violence and force to get what you need done. And that person now becomes your retainer. Eventually, we get the samurai. So these cadet branches, the Taira and the Minamoto, become known as bushi houses. These are warrior houses. So the aristocrats themselves are not necessarily known as samurai. Samurai means something like one who serves, one who retains. So the samurai are the lower ranking people that fight and are loyal to the Minamoto and the Taira. And some other clans as well, like the Northern Fujiwara, for example. But the aristocrats are the bushi. These are the warriors, the warrior aristocracy. And eventually, push comes to shove, there are problems in the imperial capital. And eventually we get this thing called the Hogan disturbance. There is something of a power struggle, and it's not between the Minamoto and the Taira explicitly. That is, there's not a power struggle in Heian over control of the emperor and control of the court, and it's not the Minamoto against the Taira. There is, in the Hogan disturbance, there is a power struggle that involves the Minamoto and that involves the Taira, but there are different members of each family on each side. So you have some Minamoto and some Taira over here, you have some Minamoto and some Taira over here, and they're both fighting each other. Well, the stronger Taira faction wins. Taira no Kiyomori, who is the leader of the Taira, basically attempts to destroy his rivals. So most of the Minamoto, or the Minamoto chunk that opposed him, basically, he kills most of the males, and the leading wife of the head of the Minamoto family spares her sons, Yoshitsune, Yoritomo, and Noriyori, by basically agreeing to become Taira no Kiyomori's wife. And then her three sons are basically exiled to monasteries, they're exiled to other estates run by other bushi families or bushi clans, and they're, as far as Taira no Kiyomori is concerned, they're basically out of the picture, pretty much. Taira no Kiyomori is able to kind of worm himself way into power. He doesn't seize power outright. Why would you do that? You have to make a new government. It's just not worth your time. It's easier to pull the strings from behind the scenes. And eventually, what he does is he manages to place his grandson, Antoku, on the imperial throne. So, hypothetically, moving forward, it's entirely possible that the Taira could seize control of Japan, or so some people fear. And this leads to one of the ex-Japanese emperors to raise the alarm, and he calls forth Minamoto no Yoritomo, the eldest son of the surviving Minamoto that were basically going to be wiped out. So at this point, there are basically two branches of the Minamoto that are left. There's the one that was not persecuted, and there's the one that was persecuted. So Minamoto no Yoritomo is the leading member of the group that was persecuted. So he agrees to raise his armies, to the extent that he basically has them, in defense of the imperial institutions, and fight the Taira and the child emperor, Antoku. In order to do this, he needs help. So the help he gets is his family. So he sends messengers, and he contacts his brothers after many years, Yoshitsune and Noriyori. So this is what starts the Gempei War. So the Gempei War runs 1180 to 1185, It is predominantly fought around central Honshu, so the imperial capital and like the surrounding region pretty much is where it's fought. And we're gonna talk more about this later on in this video and in the next video, but what I want to focus on here, because this is where we get into samurai values and stuff like that, is this Gonki Monogatari, this surviving war tale, the Heike Monogatari, the tale of the Heike. So this is a war tale, a Gonki Mono, or a Gonki Monogatari, between the Taira and the Minamoto. So this contrasts very strongly with the tale of Genji, because this is a war tale. This is all about warriors and fighting and conflict. So to do this right, the first thing I want to do is kind of read you two quotes. So the first is a quote from the Gukansho. So it's written about 1220. It's a history of Japan written by this monk, this guy named Jien. So what he says is that after senior retired Emperor Toba died on the second day of the 7th month of 1156, the first year of Hogen, so this is the Hogen rebellion, or the Hogen disturbance I mentioned a few minutes ago, fighting and strife began in Japan, and the country entered the age of the warrior, or the age of warriors, depending on how it's translated. And then the tale of the Heike opens in the following way. The sound of the Gion Shoja bell echoes the impermanence of all things. So the Gion Shoja is a temple in Japan. The color of the Sala flowers reveals the truth that the prosperous must decline. So flowers change color before they die. The proud do not endure. They are like a dream on a spring night. The mighty fall at last. They are as dust before the wind. So no matter what you do, no matter how high and mighty you are, at some point, we're gonna die. So in Christianity, you see the light. In Buddhism, there's some kinds of Buddhism anyway, you live to a ripe old age, and you hear the music of the Buddha come, and you're like, ah, crap. Well, I've lived a good life. Okay, time to be reincarnated. So my point with this is that, on the one hand, we have Jien. And Jien is very much all about 1156, crap hits the fan, and the country enters chaos, and the warrior, the violent individual, comes into his own, comes into prominence in Japanese history. Okay, pretty secular. But the tale of the Heike is talking about, well, a temple, it's talking about flowers blooming and then dying. The proud do not endure, they're like a dream on a spring night, there is dust before the wind. This is Buddhist imagery. This is Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist ideas. So, on the one hand, the tale of the Heike is a war tale. This is part of where and how and why medieval samurai ethics and medieval samurai codes of conduct, stuff like that, develop. But it's also a story about Buddhism and overcoming delusion, the idea that life is not permanent. So this is something that, and we'll talk more about this in later videos, this is something that strikes the samurai as very poignant, is that you are somebody whose whole reason for living basically is twofold. One, to be loyal to your lord. Two, to grasp the sword, charge into battle, and die. Your task, your job in life is to be a warrior. And in Buddhism, if you commit violent sins, you do not ascend to the next plane of being. You do not get reincarnated and then get one step closer to reaching nirvana, reaching peace. You get reincarnated at a lower rung. So you might be reincarnated into a plant, an animal, some other not great existence. Well, for the samurai, your job is to go kill. Your job is to be a fighter. Buddhism is interesting to them because, well, if I'm a samurai and My job is to be a warrior, to, grasp the sword and die. Then the ultimate penance for a samurai in Buddhism, when you die, is to be reincarnated once again into a samurai. So stuff like Zen Buddhism and other intellectually rigorous forms of Buddhism, things that stress discipline, become very interesting to the samurai because, well, if I get reincarnated as a samurai, well, maybe there's some other path to enlightenment that's not behaving in a good, just, upright manner. And this is where we start seeing Buddhism change as it... So, when Buddhism comes out of India, it primarily goes in two directions. It goes into Southeast Asia, and we get, through Buddhist and Hindu influence and other Indian cultural influence, we get stuff that the literature basically calls the Indianized or the Indianizing kingdoms of Southeast Asia. These are cultures that kind of draw pretty close to Indian culture. And when Buddhism makes its way into Southeast Asia, it stays, for the most part, fairly true to the teachings of the original Buddha. When it goes north, it travels along the Silk Road, and it goes into China. As it's doing that, it's going through significantly more cultures than Buddhism does when it goes into Southeast Asia, and it's interacting with more religions than it does when Buddhism goes into Southeast Asia. So it's interacting with stuff like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, eventually Manichaeanism, and it's interacting with philosophies like Taoism, Confucianism, what eventually becomes other religions in that region. So it's moving along the Silk Roads, it's encountering all this different stuff. And as Buddhism is doing this, it is developing more from a philosophy of how you should live your life and developing more into what we would recognize, I guess, as a religion. So something with, there's this idea of nirvana or moksha, depending on how you define it. This idea where it's not heaven or hell, it's simply, it's peace. It's this realm of peace. This place where you're able to ascend to eventually, where you're just free from suffering. You are neither good nor evil, you simply are. As Buddhism moves into East Asia, it takes on elements of what we would basically understand to be like a heaven-type environment. It takes on elements of what we would eventually understand to be a hell kind of environment. There is something we would understand to eventually be purgatory. There are things like bodhisattvas, so people that achieve enlightenment but do not ascend to nirvana, people that choose to basically become like the Buddhist version of a saint, where you now devote your life or your cosmic existence to helping people achieve enlightenment. So you may be familiar, and I'll probably, if I can find a copyright-free image, I'll probably throw one up on the screen, of this Hindu/Buddhist statue of an individual with 1,000,001 arms, reaching every single direction. This is Avalokiteshvara. This is a Buddhist, not a deity, it's a Buddhist bodhisattva who has 1,001 arms, because Avalokiteshvara's whole goal, his whole idea, is to reach out and, through his touch, end suffering, end pain, help people on the path to enlightenment. As Buddhism moves through East Asia, into Korea, into China, into Japan, we get different kinds of Buddha. We get Buddhas like Amitabha. So Amitabha is a Buddha who, the basic idea behind Pure Land Buddhism, or True Pure Land Buddhism, as that particular idea evolves into, is that, well, the average person can't spend their time in a monastery praying and becoming holy. So you simply say the prayer that is sacred to Amitabha, and we'll get into this when we get into the Sengoku Jidai, and you then achieve enlightenment. So there's stuff like that that's interesting to the samurai, because it's an alternative path to enlightenment. Zen is interesting to them because through rigorous intellectual discipline, you achieve enlightenment. So it's not through good deeds and karma. So there are different ways you can overcome delusion and different ways you can overcome sin and become enlightened that aren't just good deeds and living by the Eightfold Path. So this is part of what the Tale of the Heike is about, and this reflects very strongly that this is an ideal for the samurai. Now, the Gempei War ends with the Battle of Danaura. So Danaura is a naval battle in which the Child Emperor and Toku, the Taira, realize they're screwed, so they jump off the ships and they drown. And we also have in the Tale of the Heike this idea of mercy and this whole thing where the samurai are really quite different than the court aristocracy. So, Atsumori, at the Battle of Ichinotani, where Minamoto no Yoritomo, who is a military genius, comes upon the Taira camp at Ichinotani. So he's up on a mountain, and he's looking down at the Taira camp, and he realizes, okay, we can go down the mountain, we can scale it, it's going to be really dangerous, but here's the camp, we're up here. The other forces, led by, I have to double check, I believe they're led by Minamoto no Yoritomo, coming in to attack them from this direction. If we go down here, where there's a pincer movement, we can wipe out the Taira, or a Taira army, at Ichinotani. So he does this, and one of the Minamoto goes to fight a Taira soldier. So the Minamoto at this point basically were out in, and this is like 1183, 1184, roughly. They were out in the countryside still fighting. So they are very tough, hardy people. Well, the Taira were in the capital for a little while now, so they're becoming interested in court culture, luxury, stuff like that. So Atsumori is a Taira samurai. He's a Taira warrior. And a Minamoto soldier draws his sword and says, stand and fight. Atsumori tries to leave. He tries to run away. The Minamoto grabs him, yanks him off his horse, and says, okay, I got you. Now I'm going to take your head. So he rips off his base armor. And what does he see? He sees not a man. He sees a boy of 16. His face is powdered white in the court aristocratic manner. His teeth are blackened with iron filings and soot in the aristocratic manner. So he's taking on the appearance of a court aristocrat. And the Minamoto samurai is like, oh my god, this is just a kid. He says, I was going to take your head, but I can't do that. You're not really a warrior. You are, first of all, you're a boy, and you're also so culturally refined that that would be wrong of me to do. Atsutori spits in his face. He says, screw you. There are Minamoto coming in behind me. Take my head now and be done with it. So the Minamoto samurai, his opinion is revised, and he realizes even though this guy is 16, even though he is under the influence of court culture, he still has the samurai spirit, which is bravery in the face of death. Take my head and be done with it. So he cuts his head off and ensures that he won't have a dishonorable death. So we have this thing in the Tale of the Heike of Buddhism, of war, and when you're going to die, don't do it dishonorably. Now, because we've talked a lot about literature in the last video and in this one, what I want to talk about next is this. So, this is Kwaidan. It's compiled and I guess written to an extent by this guy named Lafcadio Hearn, who went to Japan in the 1800s and collected folklore, mythology, ghost stories, that kind of stuff. So Kwaidan is the first collection in English of Japanese folklore and Japanese ghost stories, and one of the stories in Kwaidan is Hoichi the Earless. So, who is Hoichi the Earless, and why is he called the Earless? Well, obviously he has no ears. Well, how did he get to that point? So, Hoichi is a bard. He is somebody who is trained in the way of entertainment. So he has this vast collection of stories in his head, and he plays a biwa, so kind of like a liar, but not really. And he recites these stories. So in the story of Hoichi the Earless, he is a bard. He's also a Buddhist monk, and he one day finds this ghost, follows the ghost. In some renditions, the ghost takes him. Either way, he ends up in the court of the Taira, the people that were defeated by the Minamoto in the Gempei War. And he is basically in front of the entire Taira court. There's the drowned Emperor and Toku, because these are all ghosts at this point, so this is a ghost story. There's the drowned Emperor and Toku, and everyone else who drowned at the Battle of Danaura after jumping off the ships. And they're like, okay, you're a bard. You know all these stories. We want to hear the story of our demise. We want to hear the Battle of Danaura. So he says, okay, I can do that for you. So he plays the story of Danaura on his biwa. He leaves, everyone's impressed, and he goes back to the monastery. But these ghosts want to keep hearing it. So he keeps getting brought back to the Taira court, and eventually he's like, all right, how does this stop? Well, the ghost can't touch you if you cover yourself in the writings of the Heart Sutra. We'll get more into this in a minute. So, the story of Hoichi the Earless, because it deals with Buddhism, this also speaks to this thing that comes up in the Tale of the Heike, where, well, life is terrible, according to Buddhism. Life is suffering, so we suffer because we want it. We end this. Well, there's the Eightfold Path. You live with right views, right intentions, etc. You can see this on the screen. So, because of karma, the law of cause and effect, the current life we have is due to actions in past lives. So how do we break the cycle? How do we fix this? If to be a samurai is to just continually be reborn into the life of a samurai, and to keep sinning, to keep killing. How do we fix this? So the answer to this, as far as the samurai are concerned, is the Heart Sutra. So, in the Heart Sutra, this is a specific text and a specific way of looking at Buddhism. The body is emptiness. Emptiness is nothing more than the body. So because the body is emptiness, because the body is nothing, and life is nothing. And but what I mean by that is that life is not devoid of meaning. I mean, life is like metaphysically like empty. Like none of this is real. This is just a stage. This is just a stage on the next stop to the road to nirvana. So, in emptiness, there is no feeling, no thought, no consciousness. There are no eyes. There is no nose. There is no tongue. There is no mind, no body. There are no ears. So, in order for Hoichi to get away from the ghost, he has to become nothing. Well, how do you become nothing? You write the Heart Sutra on your body, and then because you have become nothing, the ghost cannot touch you because it recognizes that you are nothing because you're covered by this holy text. Well, they miss his ears. So when the ghost comes looking for him to get him back to sing the tale of the Battle of Danaura to the drowned Taira court, the Heart Sutra character is not on his ears. So the ghost comes, grabs his ears. It's the only thing he sees because it's not covered by the Heart Sutra, so it has physical form in the world, and he rips his ears off. Thus, we get Hoichi the Earless. My point with this is that the tale of Hoichi the Earless and much of the stuff in Kwaidan and the tale of the Heike and everything else is, yeah, They're war stories, yeah, it's folklore, yeah, it's ghost tales, but it's filled with Buddhism. So Buddhism, because the samurai know all these stories, Buddhism and this whole idea of how do we achieve enlightenment, how do we get to the next stage if all we do is kill, is something they're very much concerned with. Now, Kwaidan, everything in Kwaidan, before it was written down, was oral in nature. And because it is oral, because stuff like the Tale of Heike also were oral, by the time this stuff gets codified and written down, there are multiple versions that exist. These are all told by wandering blind monks, among other people, singing them on their biwas. So they're playing the music and telling the tale. So they're traveling the country. The result is that in a world where the average person is not really literate, they're familiar with this stuff. So for samurai and the discussion of samurai values, stuff like Kwaidan, like the Tale of Hoichi the Earless, and the Tale of the Heike, and the Taiheki, stuff like that, all these different gunkimono, these war tales, they demonstrate samurai values, and they show the following. The rise in Buddhist apocalyptic thinking, fascination with death, ideas of honor, individual loyalty, regret, suffering, life is vain, life to be alive is to continuously suffer, etc. It also reflects that samurai are people who exist kind of outside the established order of things, but these are also all idealizations to stress individual loyalty, regret, vanity, suffering, honor, suggests that these are things that the average samurai, to a degree, did not necessarily follow. And it's also with this whole thing with Buddhism being like an underlying theme in the Tale of the Heike, is that it's also reflected in wider intellectual and religious currents. So, like I mentioned earlier, around the year 950, 1000, 1050, like somewhere in there, there appears to have been some kind of a general population decline. So, more land is abandoned. Well, how do you solve this problem? Well, you get aristocratic families and cadet branches to go out there to defend the land. You can also encourage the development of more land by getting estates, so shogun, exempt from taxes, etc., which encourages the increased reclamation of land. And when land gets larger, well, now we have a rebound in the population around 1,000. Well, as land gets larger and larger now because of these new laws, and we have a population rebound around 1,100, well, shogun, these privatized or semi-privatized lands, as they now stand under the Japanese laws, are about half of all cultivated land. So what happens is that the warriors begin to manage and defend these shogun, and they also get the right to produce some of the stuff on the land. So we have a strong warrior culture in eastern Japan, in shogun in the area. More in central Japan, we have shogun coming under the control of temples and monasteries, and then farther to the west, we have once more shogun coming under the control of warriors. Now, these temples and monasteries have sohei, they have armed monks to defend the land. So it's in the Gempei War, and the period really right before it, that we have this militarization of Japanese frontier society, which leads to, again, the rise of apocalyptic Buddhist thinking. And in one Buddhist chronology, the year 1052 was the beginning of the Mappo, the latter days of the law, this idea of a Buddhist apocalypse in one strain of thinking. So it's not possible for individuals to be saved here, which is why, again, you see in Heike and other tales like it, this apocalyptic Buddhist thinking. I realize I've been repeating myself here, and I've kind of been going on some small tangents, but my point is that all of this stuff intersects and really underscores and underlies the intellectual foundation of the Kamakura Shogunate, which comes next after the foundation of the Minamoto win the Gempei War. So, in 1185, the Minamoto win the Gempei War. Well, now we have a problem. So, in 1156, the Hogan disturbance, Hogan rebellion, and in 1159, we have Taira no Kiyomori increasing his control of the court. So the problem here basically is, well, we have the rise of warriors, the rise of samurai, and Bushi families. They're starting to impose their will on the courts. What do we do about this? Does this mean the imperial system's going to go by the wayside? How do we fix this? The answer is that after the Minamoto win the Gempei War, Minamoto no Yoritomo establishes the Kamakura Shogunate. So it's sometimes called the Bakufu. Bakufu is something of an anachronistic term, and I have a video on this going into detail, so I'm not going to go into that here. But the Minamoto established a shogunate. So what this does is it establishes a dual power system, a dual power structure, where you have the imperial court on the one hand, so these are like the aristocrats, the non-military people, and then you have the shogunate. So it's a government by and for the samurai. So the basic idea is that the shogun, who is the head of the samurai government, so shogun initially was a title bestowed by the imperial court on generals to give them the legitimacy to raise armies to go out and fight in campaigns. Now the shogun basically is investing the person who gets the title of shogun with supreme military power at the behest of the emperor. So the idea is that they're going to work in tandem with each other to kind of govern the country. And this results in samurai rule basically going between 1184 and 1185 and 1868, when we have the fall of the last shogunate. So we have three: the Kamakura Shogunate, which is established by Yoritomo. Then we have the Ashikaga, or Muromachi Shogunate. And then we have the Tokugawa Shogunate. So this is the one that lasts until 1868. What's important here is that the shogunate does not supplant the court. We're going to talk more about this in the next video. The powers of the Kamakura Shogunate are limited. So, because the court elite, so the aristocracy, and the warrior elite are legitimized by the power of the emperor, neither side really has the upper hand. Not yet. Not initially. And this has led to a huge historiographical debate. So, Minamoto no Yoritomo gets the title of shogun around 1185. He establishes a samurai government, the Kamakura Bakufu, the Kamakura Shogunate in 1185. Really, it's by 1192 that this is really a thing. So a lot of Japanese historians have looked at this and they've been like, oh, okay, well, this is the establishment of warrior rule. Therefore, we got a dividing line in Japanese history. Before this, we have the court in power. After this, it's the warrior. Some people have had issues with this. So every field of history has like this group of scholars who are like the senior elite of that field. In Japanese studies, we call these guys the general. The top general was this guy, John Whitney Hall, who was such a brilliant scholar that he was able to look at the historiography of basically every period of when he was writing, go back through it and be like, okay, well, that doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense, this doesn't really... So he's blasting holes in the historiography of Japan. And one of the things he notices, and this is something that Jeffrey Mass goes into in his book, Antiquity and Anachronism in Japanese History, which are essays in the honor of Jeffrey Mass, because he's no longer with us, unfortunately. One of the things that Jeffrey Mass notices, and that other scholars have noticed, is that 1184, 1185 is this kind of like artificial dividing line. There's not really a solid divide between court rule and samurai rule in 1185. So is this really a good way to break up Japanese history? Probably not. A better way of doing it would probably be to divide samurai and court rule along the lines of the Jokyu War. Okay, so if the Jokyu War is probably the better dividing line, what is that? And what do I mean by this thing I have on the very bottom of the screen? Shiki. We'll get to that in a minute. So, the Jokyu War, and this is something that Jeffrey Mass goes into in his book, The Development of Kamakura Rule. This is published in about 1970. This is one of the most important books written on the Kamakura Shogunate, because basically what he's arguing, and this is what Hall argued in a lot of his work, was that in 1221, there is, so significantly after the Kamakura Shogunate's been established, there are a series of military problems. There were problems in the north of Japan. There was also a rebellion by the imperial court against the shogunate. Well, the shogunate, who at this point are under the domination of the in-law clan of Minamoto No Yoritomo, so his wife, a member of the Hojo clan, the Hojo basically take over the actual governance of the shogunate. What happens is the Hojo and the Minamoto shogun in charge, who was just like a figurehead at this point, call their vassals, and it's been determined by people like Jeffrey Mass and some other scholars that they don't need to actually call all of their vassals in order to actually defeat the imperial court. The imperial court's army is not that powerful. Well, why do they call all these guys? They do it to make a point. They do it to make the point of, well, I am your lord. I'm the guy in charge. Not him, not the emperor, not you guys. You guys don't really have autonomy. I'm the guy in charge. Me, the shogun. And behind the shogun is the Hojo family. So, 1221, I believe this war lasts for about 3 months, so I would have to double check that. The main battle is at the Battle of Uji, really just outside the imperial capital. The imperial army is defeated, and the shogunate now confiscates a lot of land from the court aristocracy. And they also now have this problem of, well, they called lords to them. They called people who ostensibly have an oath of loyalty, of fealty to the shogunate. Not all of them showed up. Some of them went to the imperial court. So those guys that went to the imperial court are out. They're over and done with. They've been divested of their power. And now they have to reward their loyal followers. So this was done with the express intention of, reaffirming that the shogun is the guy in charge. So now that the shogun is reaffirmed in that capacity, and they have to reward all these loyal followers, well, they take some loyal followers who are out east, and they move them into central Japan. And it's at this point that we have the issue of the Shiki. So the Shiki were the land stewards. Well, the land stewards have rights to different things on the land they were governing. So out east, where the Kamakura Shogunate has its base of support, these guys were used to doing things based on a precedent, a long-standing precedent of, well, I've been the Shiki, I've been the lord, the guy in charge, I've been the governor of this estate, or this village, or whatever, for this many generations. And my family has always had the right to do this. Insert thing here. So that's not really a problem in Eastern Japan. This is something the Shiki understand. Well, you go to Central Japan, the Shiki didn't really do that. Not really. And again, this is something Jeffrey Mass goes into pretty much all of his books. Now you have Shiki and lords being moved into Central Japan who are used to a certain way of doing things, that are used to getting things based on precedent. Well, now you're moving into an area of Japan where they didn't do this, not really. So you have a Shiki who's used to governing on precedent, Well, he finds out that the previous Shiki maybe once fished in this given area. Is that precedent now for claiming fishing rights in a certain creek? Maybe you find out that the previous Shiki's family, maybe they, I don't know, made bread or something with the peasants in a given village. Well, does the Shiki now have, like, milling rights? We don't really know. Because the Shiki in central Japan didn't really do the whole precedence thing. So a lot of what survives from the Kamakura period, and this is, again, the argument that 1221 should be the dividing line, because this is when this happens, a lot of what we have surviving are, like, legal documents. The Kamakura justice system is established, and samurai in this period, so the 1200s, are extremely litigious, because they have to figure out, okay, what's a right, what's a precedent, what's not. So we're going to keep going with this in the next video when we talk more about the Kamakura period. But, you know, this now has been a general overview, I guess, of the end of the Heian and the rise of samurai power, along with the intellectual shifts of Buddhist thinking, stuff like that, and really a discussion of, well, we're breaking up Japanese history. Where should we really place the dividing line? So moving forward, we are firmly in the Kamakura period. We are in the era of the samurai, the age of the warrior. If you have any questions, check out the bibliography I will have listed below at some point once I get the description up, or leave me a comment. Until then, I hope you found this enlightening, and I will see you next time.